This excerpt is from Corey Taylor's A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Heaven, or How I Made Peace with the Paranormal and Stigmatized Zealots and Cynics in the Process. This is the chapter about Farrar called One Night in Farrar. The next series of pages are no shit, holy fuck, by the book, documented, and completely bloody true. This is the result of hours spent on the job and in the thick of it, running around in the dark and nearly pissing myself. If you feel like you cannot get behind that, well, tough titty fat. Besides, I have the tapes to prove it, so suck it, or at least throw a little powder on it. Better get a pot of coffee, because we are officially about to get weird. For some of the chapters held within, my intention was to go out on some bona fide ghost hunts, recording and writing what I saw and experienced, no matter what that was, so I could have some fresh material. I have been exposed to several paranormal phenomena, even in my own home, but I wanted to spread the love. I wanted new haunts. I wanted to wander around abandoned buildings and houses like I did when I was 10 years old. I love being scared, even if I know perfectly well that there is no reason to be scared. The sensation is overwhelming. It is the closest to becoming unhinged as I allow. So when I feel it, I revel in it as much as inhumanly possible. It was time to get out of my own head and into the night. Nothing gets the blood going like pure adventure. Every step you take out of your comfort zone gets you closer to the action of life. Too many people lean into their armchairs and watch from the cheap seats when they could be charging in, getting among it, doing the deeds that get you the headlines and legendary status. There is a time and a place for complacency. There is also a time when you get your ass out of that devote on the sofa and treat life more like an amusement park than a parking lot. Nothing kills the spirit of action and excitement more than the need to take a nap after Thanksgiving dinner. Then again, if you pile on too much turkey, you miss the big game anyway. Sometimes the only way to pick up the pace is to pace yourself, so you have enough energy for the home stretch. Let those show-offs run ahead and waste their energy. Stamina will always beat arrogance in the end. So I made plans to make some myths, but in order to pull off the Great Escape, I knew I could not go alone. I was going to need a team, or at least a bunch of friends willing to sit in near dark all night without complaining much. I needed a crack squad of miscreants steady of hand or paw, equipped with nerves of steel and night vision cameras. I needed allies and night owls with tons of patience, but a penchant for the verbose. In other words, I needed a bunch of people with the night off and no plans for Crisco Twister. So I went about the business of assembling my misfit band of adventurers light, and assemble they did. My wife, codenamed the Boss. Her superpower is a near Hulk-like strength and an uncanny 6th, 7th, and 8th sense for sniffing out bullshit like a fart in a cockpit. My wife was going to be the anchor of the team, the feather and the flaws. Having absolute trust in her ability to feel when something is going to happen, she would handle leadership when our people split up for exploration. She could also limit the amount of damage we would do, as the rest of the group was akin to swinging a baseball bat in a crystal shop. Matt, codenamed Stubbs. Stubbs is the member with the most experience going on these misadventures. He would be our tech specialist, making sure we were using the right gear. That is, digital cameras, audio recorders, flashlights, and so forth. Being that he is the man with the most hair, I made an executive decision to disallow any use of candles during our surveillance. He also has a never-ending reservoir of sadism that manifests in tormenting the next person on our list. Lauren, codename Lady. Lady is what we will call the divining rod for the expedition. In other words, she is terrified of what we are going to do, what we are going to see, and what we are going to put her through. She has a propensity for screaming, running, and shaking uncontrollably. Quite frankly, it is fucking hilarious to freak her out. She is also one of the sweetest people I have ever known, which makes me feel bad about torturing her as much as we do, though I am sorry to say that the bad feeling is very short-lived. Chris, codename Big Truck. Truck is exactly like his nickname implies, a man the size of a fucking truck. Trust me, think Mac more than Ram. He is also a novice to this whole ghost hunting thing, but his enthusiasm for the project made him an obvious choice. Killjoys can suck the fun out of an auditorium, and I have no room on the squad for dickbags. At the end of the day, believe what you want. Just do not get your peanut brittle in my chocolate. So Truck was invited for his exuberance and his high-end camera. Kennedy, codename Kennedy. Kennedy is the king of what they call in sports entertainment color commentary. If there is a quip to be made, Kennedy will jump off a cliff to get to it first. That is what I want from him. The line that no one else could come up with. Oh, and he also has a sick addiction of scaring the fuck out of Lady, so he and Stubbs will be the perfect teammates together. The benefit of this setup is even if we are not able to get any evidence, it will still be ridiculous. First, though, I needed some locations. In Iowa alone, there are several famous or infamous destinations with purported paranormal activity. The most famous of these is the Axe Murder House in Villisca. An hour and a half outside of Des Moines, it has enjoyed national notoriety for over 100 years. Sometime in the wee hours of June 10, 1912, 8 people were found bludgeoned and axed to death in the home of Josiah Moore, including Josiah, his wife Sarah, their children, and 2 young visitors who were staying the night. It is one of the earliest examples of mass murder and psychotic criminal pathology in American history. It is also one of the most grisly unsolved murders ever. Over the years, the ghostly goings-on have made this place a haunted hotspot for aficionados around the world. Things fly about, screams cry out, children laugh and shriek in horror, and so forth. A friend even told me about being hit in the face with a tennis ball he was fucking about with great escape style. He was hit so hard, in fact, that it bloodied his nose. He almost broke his ankle fleeing the place. It had almost everything that I wanted in a ghost hunt. It was perfect. It is also almost always completely booked full pretty much year-round. No open reservations, much to my chagrin. I even dropped my name, to which they replied, "Corey who?" Never let it be said that an attempt at using fame to your advantage can bite you in the ass from time to time. So, I turned my attention to an old school building 30 minutes from my front door. In 1919, the Washington Township Consolidated School District was established, and 3 years later, a schoolhouse was opened in Farrar, Iowa, that would cater to kindergarten through 12th grade. Many of the local rural towns and counties utilized it until it closed in 2002 after 80 years of service. Then it sat for 5 years abandoned. In 2007, Jim and Nancy Oliver purchased it, hoping to make it a unique home while also restoring the old girl to its original luster. However, even before the couple took up residence, tales of strange goings-on had persisted for years. When they eventually moved in, they found they were not alone. Orbs darted about. Shadow people ran amok. Voices could be clearly heard everywhere. Small children were seen in the stairways before they would vanish without a trace. Nancy Oliver herself was steadied on a staircase when she nearly fell. Turning to thank her husband, whom she assumed was the one who had given her the helping hand, she found herself standing alone. After reading all this, the place definitely had potential. I also liked the fact that it was not very well known. It was not one of the common names that you see when you look up a list of popular haunts, like the Stanley Hotel in Colorado or the Amityville House, whichever one that is. It is widely believed that it was a hoax. But something was bothering me. All the research I had done did not uncover one tidbit of evidence to explain why the place was experiencing this activity. With all the reports dating back to when the school was open, it was apparent that this had been going on for a really long time, but why? For all intents and purposes, it seemed like a wholesome, friendly little establishment for that township, steeped in tradition and beloved by those who had called it their place of education. But nothing was reported involving a dark side, not even a crumb of violence. What had happened there, or what was connected to the site and was keeping it there? I prepared for metaphysical battle. Actually, I bought some digital recorders, appropriated some night vision cameras, and made sure to bring a chair. And flashlights. Oh my, did we have some flashlights. The boss has an extensive collection of them and allowed me to borrow one of her high-end flashlights, a black scorpion that she said could be dropped from the roof and would not break. I have been told that it always pays to be prepared. Honestly, I have never ever been paid for being prepared. I have been assured of payment, but there was never a cash on delivery. But it never hurts to be ahead of the curve, so I scuttled about gathering those accoutrements. I grabbed a sweatshirt too, because it gets cold. Yeah, I get cold. I am not a wuss. Oh, fuck you! We drove out in 2 vehicles, following directions that could only be understood in Iowa. Well, when you get to the first distressed and decrepit grain silo, you are close. If you pass the second distressed and decrepit grain silo, you have gone too far. As we rode along, the mood was loose and fun. The sky was doing some crazy shit, though. The colors looked like something out of a horror movie when the editors are finished with post-production. But we passed the time by concocting terrible pranks to play on Lady, who was riding in the other car and had no idea what we were planning. We were wrapping our minds around the adventure that lay before us. Stubbs was also using a fancy internet website to call Lady from phone numbers that could not be recognized, taunting her with scary silences when she answered her phone and leaving terrifyingly cryptic messages in her voicemail when she ignored his calls. The one I liked the most was when he let her sit in silence for several seconds, then muttered, "Whatever you do, do not look in the glove compartment." She screamed something fairly crass and vulgar into the phone and promptly hung up on him. Just as the excitement was making us giggle like mad people, we were there. Taking a left at a quaint country church, we turned off the highway and found the schoolhouse set back on a plot a little off the road. Across the street was a family home and a cemetery that seemed to hold most of the old residents for a 20-mile radius. The Olivers had hired a caretaker named Steve, who met us at the door and showed us to what he called the safe room. It turned out to be the old faculty lounge with a TV, some couches, and a refrigerator. For a second, dragging a cooler and all those chairs along with us seemed redundant, but then I realized that if we had not brought those things, none of this comfort would have been there. So says the laws of Murphy, anyway. A few of us ventured across the street to the tiny rustic cemetery, and judging from the headstones, it had been there a long time. Some of them dated back to the mid-1800s. It was no bigger than an average backyard in a city suburb, but the stones were ancient and the names barely legible from seasons of weathering the elements. As I strode the rows, the names appeared to be a little clearer, and suddenly it occurred to me that I recognized almost every name here. I had come across these names in my research. Here lay the family who had owned the land and had given it to the county. Here were the names of various faculty members and students. Here were the people who had grown up and died with this wonderfully unassuming school as the heart of this close-knit community. I had a strange feeling I was about to trounce around the center of their universe. Even if they were no longer around, this was still their place. I was the trespasser, the transgressor. Was I spitting in their pool, laughing in the face of their heritage? I did my best to fill my mind with positive thoughts. I was not here to condescend, I was just here to observe. Steve offered to give us a tour, but cautioned against it, saying that the feedback from the other groups had told him that the activity doubled if people were not led around beforehand, and that the experiences might be skewed if our forethought was saddled with preconception. So we decided to bypass the tour, thanking Steve for his time and accompanying him out the front door, the only exit that did not lock you out when it closed behind you, so we could have one more smoke prior to our first bit of exploration around the school. After extinguishing our cigarettes, we ventured back to the safe room to grab our gear and take a look around. The first pass to the site was like being 10 years old on a field trip to a museum. It seemed like every room had remnants of the building's old life in it. Notebooks sat in empty filing cabinets, desks were shoved into corners or overturned completely. Old pictures adorned corkboard above giant tears in the wall where people had come in to take whatever blackboards could be procured, and books from the past 50 years were shoved into the backs of cupboards to be discovered later like treasures in a killer's house. The whole place had the feeling of mass exodus, like it had been abandoned during an air raid or an attack by a tornado. In turn, it made you feel like you should flee as well. But overall, there was no malice in the air like I had felt in other places. As uncomfortable as it had become later in the evening and in the early morning hours, the school never had the feeling like we were in danger, like it did not want us there. Maybe that is why we stayed as long as we did, even after all the weirdness started happening later on. The layout was not very confusing. The school is 3 stories tall, 4 if you count the slightly below ground gymnasium. Walking in the front door, you are confronted with 2 choices: upstairs to the 2nd floor, or through a pair of entries to the ground level that overlooks the gym. Through the gym and to the left is the boiler room. To the right are the only working toilets we could use. Each floor above had 6 classrooms and respective boys' and girls' restrooms. On the 3rd floor were the principal's office and a diminutive auditorium we started referring to as a theater room. We found the old kitchen, which had a really loud dumbwaiter and some hastily stored office supplies, but the floor seemed to be falling through in places, so we decided we would not spend a lot of time wandering around in a room where the ground could breach at any moment. As we made our way upstairs to the various levels, nothing was triggering our inner Vinkman, that is, until we got to the boys' bathroom on the 2nd floor. Everyone who explored that room came away with a sickened vibe we could not put our finger on. It was pretty obvious something bad had gone down in there. I earmarked it for its own recording device and continued the preliminary walkabout. After we were done, we returned to the safe room for a quick snack and a chance to go over our initial impressions. Lady was excited, scared, but not uncomfortable. The boss voiced what we all felt. This was not the site of a murder, but there was something not right, especially in that bathroom where the ominous feeling had an emotional odor to it. Kennedy was still reserving the judgment. Stubbs was anxious to set up the equipment. Chuck was just taking it all in. I was not sure what to think, but I knew it was time to get cracking. So we finished our snacks and plotted where we would plan our devices. One audio recorder would go in the 2nd floor bathroom where we all felt sick. One camera would go in the gymnasium overlooking the entire room. Another camera would go in one of the classrooms that had given Kennedy a hinky feeling. Meanwhile, we would break up into pairs with recorders and cameras and roam, looking to engage whatever we could and try to pick up either EVPs or actual visual instances. We were finally here, the time for talk and speculation was over, it was time to get to work. Kennedy and I started in the theater room, sitting on the stage in a booth I'm fairly certain I last saw in an old A&W restaurant miles away. I do not know why it was on the stage or how it got there, but it was comfy and we could face each other. Meanwhile, Lady and the boss were doing quick sweeps of some of the other rooms on that floor and the one below. Chuck and Stubbs were down in the boiler room by the gym. The silence was so thick that I started to think I had tinnitus. Other than the near complete blackout, it was kind of relaxing. It was hot and smelled like a million kindergartners had left their soiled undies in the ceiling tile somewhere, but it was not too bad. Trust me, I've been in worse places. I once spent a night in a hotel room in Italy that reeked of dead hookers and strawberries. I could not check out of that place fast enough. The strange thing was that it had great Wi-Fi. I was doing some EVP work with Kennedy. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, it stands for electronic voice phenomena. The human voice only registers at a certain frequency or megahertz. EVPs are supposedly sounds or voices outside those parameters that can be picked up with recorders. Basically, he and I were asking questions and sitting in silence, trying to allow time and space for an answer that we may or may not hear with the naked ear. We had been sitting there for a while, asking random questions and hoping we could elicit a response, when we both heard what was either crying, laughing, or moaning. We looked at each other and listened intently, hoping to discern if it was our compatriots or something we could not explain. We decided it might have been a dog, but we filed it away for further discussion later. This is how it went for a while, sitting in rooms, asking questions to the night that had very little hope of being answered right away. As we went outside for another round of smokes, we talked about ways to beat the ennui. Stubbs thought it would be a good idea to chain Lady up and leave her in the boiler room. He could not understand why she did not share his sentiments. We finally agreed on doing some EVP work in the theater room together. We went inside and moved some of the recording equipment around to different rooms, making sure to say that we were doing so aloud so that it was documented properly. I went to another classroom to try an experiment. I set up some toy cars in an attempt to possibly broker some movement out of whatever was running around the place. Chuck must have had the same idea because he entered another room and opened one of the file cabinets to see if something would happen to it. Then we set up shop in the theater room, sitting in a circle in front of the stage like some bizarre campfire round robin. You might want to grab your popcorn because this is where it gets interesting. It started with the boss, who, as I said before, has an extra sense for these things, hearing singing. She described a little boy somewhere in the complex singing the Pledge of Allegiance, sort of showing off for us like children are prone to do. Every once in a while, some of us could pick up on it a bit. The boss could hear it plain as day, though. Suddenly she shot up out of her seat and said, "What room is across the hall to the left by the stairs?" It was a classroom. Kennedy and I had been inside while we were moving around other recorders. We all grabbed our flashlights and, like some bizarre wayward football huddle, we moved in that direction. There had been an encyclopedia sitting on the windowsill in that room when we were there, and the floor was clean. As we entered, the first thing I noticed were torn pages. Torn pages! Lying on the floor across the room from where that book was still sitting, now open and rent asunder. No windows were open, and we were the only people around. Someone had torn pages out of this book and strewn them all over the place. We sat there listening intently. The boss was trying to get the little boy's name. We all held our breath. The lack of sound was suffocating. So you can imagine our reaction when, from somewhere far below us, deep in the school, we heard a crash of metal on metal that was loud enough to make Lady cry out. Like something out of a scene from the movie Clue, we all shot through the hallways and down the stairs to the room in question. At first we could not figure out what had made that horrendous noise. Then Chuck calmly stated, "That file cabinet was open when I went upstairs." He had opened it as a sort of test before we had corralled ourselves in the theater room. We looked. All the drawers were closed. When I yanked on it myself, the damn thing had been slammed shut so hard I had to jerk it to get it open. There was much conjecture and running of scenarios, but we all agreed that even if there had been a window open, the wind could not have shoved that thing back in. The rusty resistance was too strong. Someone had to have pushed it shut. Hard. We returned to our circle of trust, discussing everything excitedly. Stubbs and I wondered if we were experiencing things now because we were ignoring it. Before, we were kind of chasing favor and got nothing. Now, though, we were paying more attention to each other, so the activity felt a little like, "Pay attention to me." So it made sense to continue that approach. Let it come to us, and not the other way around. We repositioned the recorders, and some of us went outside for smoke, while the others stayed behind to listen and watch. I was enjoying the chill and inhaling the smoke when I could have sworn I saw something in the trees around the corner from where we stood. I did not have time to explore that too much. A light came on in one of the rooms, and we were fairly certain none of our people were in there. Kennedy ran inside to check. The group who had stayed behind was right where we had left them, and a further search of the room in question left us scratching our heads. As we finished our carcinogens, a car pulled up. It was our friends Biff and Knees. Well, of course these are code names. Who would name their child Knees? I did not want to give them too much info, seeing as how I wanted a righteous judgment about the place. So I chose to wait to fill them in on everything until after they had gotten a feel for the surroundings. They were greatly intrigued and very excited. A couple of beers imbibed on their part probably did not hurt their states of mind either, but I was not too worried about that. I guided Biff and Knees through the hallways, showing them the rooms and the layout, but not going into detail about anything other than the history. We were down in the lower section by the gymnasium. I was holding one of the double doors open for them to come through so we could descend the stairs down to see the boiler room. I heard something like movement through air, and Knees yet let out a yell. Biff and I turned to see what the trouble was, and he said, "Something just ran past me and stepped on my foot." I scanned back down the hallway only to see nothing. Knees shook it off, and we laughed as we went to see the rest of the building. After we finished the brief tour, we grabbed some more chairs and went back to find our friends to reassemble our kinetic circle for some chit-chat. Just outside the door to the theater room in the hallway, I had set up a recorder on a chair. From my vantage point, I could see the red light on the device, letting me know it was still on. This turned out to be terribly handy. While we were all sitting around talking about past experiences, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that something was constantly blocking that red light. I started tuning everyone out and shifted my focus to the doorway. Sure enough, I saw something peeking around the corner at me several times. Stubbs saw it too. It was like a spooky version of Catch Me If You Can. Just as we were all turning our attention to the doorway, we heard something in the room immediately behind us. There was a door that connected the two rooms, and as we stepped into it, I heard laughter in the hallway. Spine-tingling stuff, but I was starting to feel something else. I know I am, supposedly, a big, strong, badass man and everything. Even so, I was frustrated. This was getting ridiculous, and not for nothing, I wanted to kick that little shit's ass. Meanwhile, the temperature in the theater room was starting to get schizophrenic. One moment it would be nice and cozy, and seconds later it would be stiflingly uncomfortable. Sweat ran from our faces and then suddenly dried as it cooled. So we walked around some more. I took Biff and Niece to that bathroom where we had all felt physically ill. As we stood in the dark, around a corner by the stalls, Biff whispered, "I think I'm going to throw up." I could feel her pain. This was a type of porcelain hell, draped in Art Deco and painted with some sort of unnatural misery. What the hell could have happened in there? I started looking at how the restroom was designed. As you walked through the door, you could go to the right to one set of stalls and urinals, or you could go to the left with an entirely different set of both. There was one catch. If you went to the left, one of the stalls cut off the rest of the room. But if you went to the right, you could keep going around by the window. I discovered there was a two-person-sized nook back in that corner, hidden from view. It suddenly occurred to me that it was the perfect place for an attack. The layout was almost ripe for a sexual assault. No one would see anything from the doorway if they entered. My mind twisted that over and over like an equation. Was that why it was borderline unbearable in that bathroom? If so, who was victim and who was predator? Mind you, I have not one shred of evidence. This is all hypothesis. But I know what I'm talking about. I've been on the dangerous end of that type of business. I recognized the feeling in my chest from standing in that room. I knew it all too well. Something very bad had happened in there, and though I was not sure exactly what that thing was, I knew it like I knew the sound of rain and the feel of fire. I took my friends and got out of there. We did some more walking around and some more EVP work, trying to chase down as many actions as we could. But the night was winding down. We decided to do one more round of the place. Everyone else went down to the first floor. The boss and I stayed upstairs. We were in one of the classrooms talking and trying to coax a little more from our childlike visitor. Suddenly we heard whistling in the hall. We assumed it was the others and continued our conversation. But then we heard the others coming up the stairs, on the other side of the school. When they came to our room, they asked us if we had been whistling. We said we had thought they were the ones doing it. Luckily, there had been a camera set up in the hallway, shooting down to capture any movement. We rewound to the spot. Sure enough, with no one around, an unsettling bit of whistling began to lilt through the air. It made me excited to check what we had gathered that night. It was also the perfect capper for the evening. It was 2 a.m. Even though we had the building until 7 that morning, we were all tired and longing for our beds, so we began packing up and getting our shit ready to take it all home. We crawled into our vehicles for the trip. You can imagine the dichotomy. These adventurous scamps who had been so eager to see what the old madam had to offer, now so obviously exhausted that most of us fell asleep in the car before we got back to the two-lane highway that led the way back to the hearth. Our curiosity sated, we fell in between the sane and slumber, minds racing for the close embrace of sleep, while cataloging our various encounters. "'Nuff said," as Stanley put it. "Shut the machines down and recharge." It was a few weeks before I was able to sit down and sift through the hours of footage and audio tracks to see what I could find, helped along with a healthy dose of coffee, smokes, and quiet. There were all the cameras in the halls and the gym, the audio recorders set in the various classrooms and bathrooms, and the handheld recorders we were all carrying around with us. Let me tell you, the only thing more boring than reading and recording your own audiobook is sitting, watching, waiting, and listening to hours of content in the hopes of capturing something fantastic. Some shit did not even show up. There were various tracks that failed to record for some reason. Listening back, I could hear voices complaining that the power kept draining in the batteries. So some of the evidence did not get captured. Note to self, next time plug this shit into a wall socket. Of the stuff that was recorded, there are several conversations of past experiences that I will tell you about later on in the book. There are hours of nothing. There are noises from outside and squeaking wood. The floors in the theater room were especially peculiar sounding. It gave me the impression of breathing, somewhere between Darth Vader and Bane. So my investigation was moving in fits and starts, from silence to silly quips. That was until I found something that could not be explained. In some of the rooms, out of nowhere, the recorders picked up soft humming. This was not electric in any way, this was musical, the sound of a child walking around with a song stuck in his or her head. It showed up on several different recorders, almost like this kid was casually strolling through the halls from room to room, singing for anyone who could hear. It made me wonder if this was the kid that the boss heard when we were sitting around in a circle. I also found breathing in the boys' bathroom where we all felt sick. This was a recorder we had set up and left to see what we could get. The breathing appears hours after anyone has been in there. It starts, lasts a few seconds, and then it just stops. It is another 30 minutes before anyone comes in, and his or her presence is announced and punctuated by the heavy door opening and slamming shut. The stuff that we witnessed and heard is also there. The file cabinet slamming shut is heard on several devices. More chilling was the shape I caught on one of the cameras. Upstairs, in what used to be the principal's office, a shape blocks one of the lights for a full 10 seconds, and then you can see it move away to the left. It disappeared into a storage closet that has no exit and nothing comes out the entire time afterward. Of course, there are things that can be explained right away. The moaning or crying that Kennedy and I heard most assuredly was a dog howling outside. There are whines that slowly materialize into car engines. 9 times out of 10, footsteps turn out to be Stubbs. That boy has the heaviest feet of any person alive. He sounds like Frankenstein rolling out for a morning jog. There's a glorious moment on one of the devices when someone, and I will not say who, is sitting in a room, alone, and they cut one of the raunchiest farts known to all recorded history. This was a Roman fart. A fart that could conquer territories and topple governments. It was a fucking funnier than hell, and it was made even more hilarious because that person not only says "excuse me" to no one in particular, but they also start to giggle uncontrollably. Someone else ends up coming in the room, and they must have gotten a whiff because you hear a quiet little "what the fuck?" Then the perpetrator loses control altogether. I laughed out loud myself when I came to that bit. It made my fucking night. My analysis for the Farrar schoolhouse is simple but complicated, to say the least. I believe something is there, but I also believe that it has nothing to do with a murder or death. I just think this building has become a home, a safe place, for a wayward spirit. I'll explain it like this. Aside from the dark feeling we felt in that second-floor bathroom, none of us had the impression that something bad had happened in that building. There's something to be said about that because many people can really tell when a location has that kind of sinister feeling. Places like Dachau and Neely Plaza in Dallas have those vibes. Like the violent events caused something to change in the very environment, giving it an edge and a sadness that was not there before. My team did not feel that anywhere other than the bathroom, so my opinion is that yes, there is something there, but it could easily be a spirit who resides in the cemetery across the street and has returned to the schoolhouse because that was where it was the happiest. It could also be a spirit of the child who had something happen in that bathroom and that torment has tied it inexplicably to this building in the middle of nowhere. It could be a shadow of someone's life, like a teacher who both attended and taught at the school and returned because so much of their life was spent treading these hallways. Who knows, really? To me, it would most likely take someone from that same time to find out exactly who or what that person is and why its soul has chosen this place to replay and relive its days. I may never know, and quite frankly it will not cause me to lose sleep, but someone has that knowledge. Who knows if that question will ever be answered to the best of our abilities. As I sit here months later thinking about it, I am struck by several notions. That schoolhouse felt like it had a personality unto itself. The more we spent time in it, the more we got to know it and to appreciate the adventures and the experiences we held during our stay there. I remember walking around outside by myself, getting the lay of the land and just taking it all in. The sky still had that ominous hue about it, and all the playground equipment was rusty and dark, threatening us more with tetanus than anything resembling a good time. The trees around the place definitely helped set the mood. Their limbs hung low around your head like hands reaching for fistfuls of your hair, wanting to drag you up into their leaves and digest you at their leisure. So maybe these factors set the tone for that evening and the things we felt and saw. But I consider myself to be a fairly intelligent and level-headed chap. I do not panic easily and I do not run from danger or the unexpected. All I really know is that I have a handful of memories that I share in some way with the people I was there with, and we were all involved. Make your own mind up as far as I'm concerned. Some people might say we wanted to find something there. Others might say we left before anything else fascinating could happen. This debate will rage long after I'm finished typing it up. Who saw what and what was real and so on. Personally, I feel like these rich visions are what they appear to be. A collision of data and stimuli that occurred in an environment to instill belief and satisfactory contemplation. You can try to figure it out all you want, like dissecting a magic trick behind the master's back. You can twist it around forever, and maybe you will have varying conclusions each time. But those are rare privileges for the ones who did not make the journey. For those who stood watch and tested our mettle, we know the score better than the team who was playing. It is a matter of knowing and believing, like I have said before. I know because I was there. You can believe what you want, but because you were absent on the day in question, I rest my case gladly. I guess the best way to tie all this up is to tell you about the last bit of evidence I found in the Farrar files. Here's the scene. We had all been camped out in the theater room talking. After a while, we all decided we needed to smoke our asses off again, like we ever needed any convincing, so we left the room. Kennedy stayed behind, quietly listening for anything that we might miss. The recorder was in the middle of the room, and it picked up our exit. For 10 minutes, there is nothing but Kennedy's breathing. Finally, he said out loud, "Well, I think I'm going to go outside with everyone else. We might be gone for a little bit, so if there's anything you want to say or do before I go, here's your chance. Can you make a sound? A noise? Anything?" Silence reigned. You eventually hear Kennedy stand up and head toward the door, saying, "Well, it was worth a shot." The words trail away, falling into silence, along with his footsteps. The room is left empty. It is very obvious that there is no one in the room. Out of nowhere, something knocks on a metal folding chair 3 times.